Superman 1948. This live-action serial was the first time Superman appeared in a full-length theatrical format. It starred Kirk Alyn as Superman, though the studio originally promoted him as an unnamed actor to maintain the illusion that Superman was real. Noel Neill played Lois Lane, and this was the first of several times she'd take on the role. The serial was produced by Columbia Pictures and directed by Spencer Gordon Bennett and Thomas Carr. It ran for 15 chapters, totaling over 4 hours when combined, and was shown in theaters weekly as a cliffhanger series. The budget was around $325,000, extremely low even for the time, and that meant heavy reliance on low-cost effects. Instead of wirework or mechanical rigs, Superman's flying scenes were animated. When he took off, the live-action Kirk Alyn would leap into the air, and then the footage would switch to hand-drawn animation of Superman in flight. It was jarring even by 1940s standards, but it was the only option within the financial limitations. The plot followed Clark Kent working for the Daily Planet and uncovering a criminal organization led by a mysterious villain named the Spider Lady. Her goal was to steal a weapon called the Reducer Ray. Each episode focused on Superman thwarting her efforts, often ending with a dramatic moment like a crashing vehicle, a collapsing building, or a trap closing around Lois or Jimmy. The format was repetitive by design to keep audiences coming back each week. The serial's Krypton origin was briefly shown using narration and basic visuals. Jor-El and Lara were introduced in a short segment that explained the planet's destruction. Baby Kal-El was sent to Earth, and the Kents found him and raised him. That part was condensed into just a few minutes to get to the main Earth-based action faster. There was no Fortress of Solitude, and Clark's powers were barely explained. He just had them. No mention of kryptonite appeared in the serial. This version of Superman emphasized physical stunts, old-school detective work, and newspaper-style crime plots. Kirk Alyn didn't receive on-screen credit in the title cards, which was a marketing choice to enhance the mystery. The serial was successful enough that it led to a sequel in 1950 with the same actors, helping to solidify Superman's presence outside of comics and radio. Atom Man vs. Superman. This serial came out in 1950 as a direct sequel to the 1948 serial. Kirk Alyn returned as Superman and Clark Kent, and Noel Neill also returned as Lois Lane. This second serial also ran for 15 chapters, and like the first, it was distributed by Columbia Pictures and directed by Spencer Gordon Bennett. It had a slightly higher budget than its predecessor, but still relied heavily on minimal effects, stock footage, and repeated animation sequences to cut costs. The story introduced Lex Luthor to live action for the first time, played by Lyle Talbot. He operated both as himself and under the alias Atom Man, a masked villain who plotted to destroy Metropolis with advanced weapons and blackmail the government. His costume was basic by today's standards, just a metal helmet and a black jumpsuit, but the character's motivations were focused on power and domination through technology, already showing elements that would define Luthor in later versions. The special effects remained primitive. Superman still flew through hand-drawn animation whenever he left the ground. Live-action sequences used trampolines, smoke, and wind machines for practical stunts. Some chapters reused shots from the earlier serial. Fight scenes and rescues were shot on cramped sets and relied more on camera angles and music than real danger. This serial leaned more into science fiction, introducing gadgets like teleportation devices, synthetic kryptonite, and disintegration rays. Luthor's hideout featured oversized control panels and blinking lights. At one point, he trapped Superman in a dimensional transporter that sends him into a limbo space, which was portrayed using simple effects and narration. Civilians and authority figures had a much bigger role, with police and government agents showing up often. Clark continued to work at the Daily Planet alongside Lois and Jimmy Olsen. There were more newsroom scenes than superpowered action, and many chapters focused on investigation, surveillance, and sneaking around rather than large-scale battles. Kryptonite was used again, still depicted as a vague glowing rock with no explanation of origin. Whenever it showed up, Superman weakened immediately and had to be rescued or waited out. Lex used it several times during his plans to destroy Superman. Though limited by budget and the serialized format, the serial was successful in its time and helped establish Luthor's presence in Superman lore. It closed out Kirk Alyn's time in the role, as no further sequels were produced after this chapter. By the way, if you guys want to subscribe, I'm going to start posting a lot here. Anyways, Superman and the Mole Men. This serial released in 1951 and marked the first feature-length Superman film. It starred George Reeves as Superman and Phyllis Coates as Lois Lane. It was directed by Lee Sholem and had a runtime of only 58 minutes. The film served as a promotional launch for Adventures of Superman, the television series that would start the following year, also starring Reeves. It was produced independently by Lippert Pictures on a low budget, and it was the first Superman project to be shot on 35mm black and white film. The story follows Clark Kent and Lois Lane as they travel to the town of Silsby to cover the opening of the world's deepest oil well. The well accidentally drills into an underground world, causing small humanoid creatures with glowing eyes, the Mole Men, to surface. The townspeople quickly react with fear and violence, forming an armed mob to hunt the creatures. Superman steps in to protect the Mole Men and calm the town, highlighting themes of fear, prejudice, and misunderstanding. The Mole Men were portrayed by actors in makeup and black outfits, and their glowing eyes were created with practical lighting effects on their costumes. Their movements were slow and deliberate, emphasizing their alien nature without advanced effects. There were no special powers shown from the Mole Men themselves, and they weren't depicted as dangerous, only misunderstood. George Reeves' Superman relied mostly on strength and flight, but flying was depicted using minimal effects. In many scenes, Reeves jumps off screen to simulate takeoff, and landing was often shown by him stepping into frame. For actual flight, they used a mixture of wires and rear projection with limited animation. There were no elaborate fight scenes. Superman mostly used dialogue and intimidation to stop conflicts, aligning with the film's message of peace over violence. There's no mention of Kryptonite, the Fortress of Solitude, or other major Superman lore. The focus stayed on social themes and basic action. The film ends with Superman delivering a moral judgment against the townspeople's violent behavior, siding with compassion and reason. It was a small-scale production but became influential due to George Reeves' performance, setting the tone for the Superman series that followed. Despite its limited runtime and effects, it was the first time Superman was treated in a standalone film format for general audiences. Superman the movie. The movie was directed by Richard Donner, and it starred Christopher Reeve as Superman, Margot Kidder as Lois Lane, Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, and Marlon Brando as Jor-El. The production budget was around $55 million, which made it one of the most expensive films ever at the time. It earned over $300 million worldwide, which was massive for a superhero film during that era. The screenplay was written by Mario Puzo, the same person who wrote The Godfather, but it was heavily revised by other writers before filming. The film opens on Krypton, which is about to explode. Jor-El, played by Brando, sends his son to Earth in a spaceship. The visual effects for Krypton and the journey through space were extremely advanced for the late 1970s. Once on Earth, Clark Kent grows up in Smallville, Kansas, and the film takes time to show his human upbringing before he becomes Superman. The scenes in Smallville were filmed in Alberta, Canada. Clark moves to Metropolis and becomes a reporter for the Daily Planet, where he meets Lois and begins his double life. One of the most groundbreaking aspects was the use of the Zoptic process, which made it look like Reeve was really flying. They used front projection and a combination of wire work, optical effects, and model work to create believable flight scenes. For the time, this was a huge leap forward in visual storytelling. The tagline was, "You'll believe a man can fly," and that really was the goal with the effects team. They spent months perfecting the wire rig system and rear projection setups just to make the flight sequences look smooth and natural. Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor was more comedic and theatrical than some later versions. He had two sidekicks, Otis and Miss Teschmacher, and their plan involved triggering earthquakes by detonating a nuclear missile in California. Superman stops the missile, but not before it causes massive destruction. When Lois dies, Superman turns back time by flying around the Earth fast enough to reverse its rotation. That part stirred controversy because it broke physical laws, but it served a narrative purpose. The score, composed by John Williams, became iconic. The theme is still instantly recognizable, and it set the standard for superhero scores moving forward. Superman 2. The movie was released in 1980 and had one of the strangest production histories of any superhero film. Richard Donner, who directed the first film, shot most of the sequel during the original production, but he was replaced before the movie was finished. Richard Lester came in to complete the film, and the studio had him reshoot large portions to get full directing credit. That's why the tone shifts between scenes, with some being serious and others leaning into slapstick. Christopher Reeve returned as Superman, Margot Kidder as Lois Lane, Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, and Terrence Stamp joined the cast as General Zod. Sarah Douglas played Ursa, and Jack O'Halloran played Non, Zod's silent enforcer. All three villains were banished to the Phantom Zone in the first movie, and they escape after a hydrogen bomb explodes in space. That explosion was changed from the first movie's ending, where Superman launched a missile, but the cause of the escape was altered during reshoots. The budget was around $54 million, just slightly less than the first, and it made over $190 million globally. Most of the major effects were built off techniques from the original. Flight sequences used the same wire rigs and optical compositing, but the battle in Metropolis added more complex stunts. Superman fights Zod, Ursa, and Non in the middle of the city, destroying cars, buildings, and causing chaos. They also used miniatures and rotoscope animation to enhance the destruction scenes. One major plotline shows Superman giving up his powers to live a normal life with Lois. He steps into a crystal chamber in the Fortress of Solitude that removes his Kryptonian abilities. That decision becomes a huge problem when Zod and his team take over the White House and demand Superman kneel before Zod. Eventually, Clark regains his powers through a second crystal chamber, though the film never explains how it works twice with opposite effects. effects. The final confrontation includes Superman tricking the villains into entering the chamber while he reverses its function from outside. Zod and Non lose their powers and fall into a chasm. Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor tries to switch sides again, but Superman sees through it. The film ends with Superman flying the American flag back onto the White House roof, a pretty blunt symbol of restoration and order. Superman 3. This one came out in 1983 and took a sharp turn from the tone of the first two. Richard Lester returned as the director, and the shift toward comedy became obvious right away. Christopher Reeve was back as Superman, but most of the original cast either didn't return or had reduced roles. Margot Kidder only appeared briefly, and Gene Hackman was entirely absent. Instead, the story focused on new characters, including Gus Gorman, played by Richard Pryor. He was a computer programmer who accidentally becomes a tech genius. The movie had a budget of about $39 million and earned just over $80 million worldwide. That was a major drop from the previous entries. A lot of the plot centers on computers, which were a big novelty at the time. Gus uses his skills to embezzle money from his company, which catches the attention of a billionaire industrialist named Ross Webster. Webster wants to control global industries, and he uses Gus to help build a supercomputer capable of manipulating satellites and even weather systems. There's a key scene where synthetic kryptonite is created using Gus's computer program. Since scientists didn't know one of the elements in real kryptonite, Gus substitutes tar. This fake kryptonite doesn't kill Superman, but it changes his personality. He becomes aggressive, selfish, and lazy. That leads to one of the most memorable parts of the movie where Superman literally fights himself. Clark Kent and his corrupted alter ego brawl in a junkyard, and Clark eventually wins, symbolically purging the dark side of himself. The special effects continued to rely on wire work and optical tricks, but the scale was more limited. The supercomputer at the end becomes a sort of final boss. It turns sentient and traps people, even transforming one woman into a cyborg. That scene scared a lot of kids at the time, even though the tone of the movie was mostly lighthearted. Superman destroys the machine by feeding it unstable chemicals that cause an internal explosion. The film ends with Superman dropping Gus off at a coal mine to start a new honest life, then flying away after fixing the damage caused by Webster's schemes. John Williams didn't return to score the movie, so Ken Thorne composed a new soundtrack that reused some earlier themes. The movie tried to mix slapstick, satire, and superhero action, but the result felt disconnected and uneven. Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. Released in 1987, this was the final film in the original Superman series and also the lowest budgeted. Christopher Reeve returned as Superman, and this time he had a major role behind the scenes. He co-wrote the story and pushed for a plot that dealt with nuclear disarmament. The budget was slashed down to around $17 million, which caused huge issues during production. Cannon Films, the studio behind it, had financial problems, and it showed. Scenes meant to be global in scale looked small and rushed. Gene Hackman returned as Lex Luthor, and this time he cloned a new villain from Superman's DNA. Nuclear Man, played by Mark Pillow, was created using a strand of Superman's hair attached to a nuclear missile. Once the missile exploded in the sun, Nuclear Man was born. He had glowing armor, a scratchy voice dubbed by Hackman, and powers that mostly mirrored Superman's, with the added bonus of claws. He also lost all power when out of sunlight, which became important later. The movie reused flying effects from earlier films, but with the budget cuts, the quality dropped hard. Many flying shots were recycled, and the blue screen lines were more visible. Even the wires were easier to spot in several scenes. The fight scenes between Superman and Nuclear Man looked clunky, especially the lunar battle, where gravity and physics were completely ignored. At one point, they punch each other on the moon and somehow make sound in space. Another scene has Superman rebuilding the Great Wall of China using vision beams that were never explained or mentioned before. The film tried to tackle real-world issues by having Superman remove all nuclear weapons from Earth. He collects them and throws them into the sun. Critics called it overly simplistic and preachy, especially because the rest of the movie felt so chaotic. There were entire subplots cut to save money. For example, a second Nuclear Man was filmed and deleted entirely. Reeve was reportedly disappointed with how much of the original vision got removed. John Cryer played Lenny Luthor, Lex's annoying nephew, and the role leaned heavily into comic relief. Margot Kidder returned as Lois Lane, but the chemistry and writing weren't on par with the earlier films. The movie ended with Superman delivering a speech about peace, but the franchise didn't recover. It was the lowest grossing film in the series and marked the end of that version of Superman on screen. Superman Returns. Released in 2006 and directed by Bryan Singer, this film acted as a soft reboot while still connecting back to the original movies, especially the first two. It completely ignored the events of Superman 3 and 4. Brandon Routh took over as Superman, styled to resemble Christopher Reeve both in looks and performance. Kate Bosworth played Lois Lane, Kevin Spacey played Lex Luthor, and James Marsden joined as Richard White, a new character who was engaged to Lois. The budget was massive, sitting around $200 million, and the movie earned just over $390 million globally. That made it a modest success, but not enough to launch launch a full new franchise. The film opens with Superman returning to Earth after disappearing for 5 years to search for remnants of Krypton. When he comes back, he finds Lois has moved on, raising a young son, and winning a Pulitzer Prize for an article titled "Why the World Doesn't Need Superman." Lex Luthor is released from prison because Superman missed his court date during his absence. He then cons a wealthy widow into leaving him her fortune, which he uses to steal Kryptonian technology from the Fortress of Solitude. Luthor's plan is to grow a new continent using crystals from Krypton combined with kryptonite. As the landmass grows, it threatens to flood large parts of the world, making Luthor the ruler of whatever's left. The visual effects leaned heavily on computer-generated imagery, including full digital doubles of Superman for complex flying scenes. The most talked about moment was the airplane rescue, where Superman saves a crashing space shuttle and lands it in a baseball stadium. That scene alone took months to create and became the movie's visual centerpiece. Costume design updated the classic suit with darker shades and a textured S symbol, but some fans criticized the muted color palette. A major twist revealed that Lois's son has powers hinting he's Superman's biological child. This subplot was left unresolved because no sequel followed. The tone of the movie was much more reflective and emotional, focusing on Superman's isolation and struggle to reconnect. John Ottman composed the score, blending original music with John Williams' themes from the 1978 film. The movie closed with Superman visiting a sleeping Lois and repeating Jor-El's speech about humans' potential, echoing the voice of Marlon Brando, which was digitally reused. Man of Steel. Released in 2013 and directed by Zack Snyder, this was a full reboot of the Superman franchise with a modern, darker tone. Henry Cavill took on the role of Clark Kent, marking the first time a non-American actor played the character in a major film. Amy Adams played Lois Lane, Michael Shannon played General Zod, and Russell Crowe took on the role of Jor-El. Kevin Costner and Diane Lane played Jonathan and Martha Kent. The script was written by David S. Goyer with Christopher Nolan producing. The movie had a budget of around $225 million and grossed over $660 million worldwide. Unlike previous films, it opened with a detailed sequence on Krypton, showing the planet's political collapse, natural disaster, and civil war. Jor-El steals genetic material called the Codex and embeds it into his newborn son Kal-El before sending him to Earth. General Zod tries to stop him, but he's arrested and sent to the Phantom Zone. Krypton explodes shortly after. Clark's upbringing is told through non-linear flashbacks. He grows up hiding his powers, taught by Jonathan Kent to keep his abilities secret. The tone is much more serious, showing the internal struggle of balancing identity, morality, and responsibility. After discovering an ancient Kryptonian scout ship in the Arctic, Clark learns about his heritage and dons the Superman suit. Lois tracks him down, figures out his identity, and chooses not to reveal it publicly. Zod returns to Earth with his followers after escaping the Phantom Zone. His plan is to use a device called the World Engine to terraform Earth into a new Krypton, which would wipe out all human life. The final battle takes place in Metropolis and is extremely destructive. Skyscrapers collapse, entire city blocks are leveled, and thousands of lives are implied to be lost, though the movie doesn't dwell on the civilian toll. The climax ends with Superman snapping Zod's neck to stop him from killing civilians, which caused a lot of debate. It was the first time in a major film that Superman killed someone directly. Hans Zimmer composed a new score that ditched the classic fanfare and leaned into heavy drums and emotional buildup. The flying effects combined practical stunts, CGI, and digital doubles to create speed and impact. The film set up a new universe, but the tone and decisions divided audiences and critics. It remains one of the most debated Superman adaptations ever. Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. Released in 2016 and directed again by Zack Snyder, this was the follow-up to Man of Steel and also the first live-action film to feature Batman and Superman together. Henry Cavill returned as Superman, while Ben Affleck debuted as Bruce Wayne. The cast also included Gal Gadot as Diana Prince, Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, Amy Adams again as Lois Lane, and Jeremy Irons as Alfred. The film had a reported budget of around $250 million and earned over $870 million globally. The story picks up after the destruction of Metropolis and Man of Steel. Bruce Wayne witnesses the chaos firsthand during Zod's attack and views Superman as a dangerous, unchecked alien force. That sets the foundation for his growing distrust and eventual decision to take Superman down. The movie jumps between perspectives, showing Bruce preparing for battle while Clark questions Batman's vigilante tactics. Lex Luthor works behind the scenes to manipulate both, pushing them toward confrontation. The film dives deep into themes of power, fear, and legacy. Superman struggles with public opinion turning against him, while Batman becomes increasingly obsessed with stopping him. Kryptonite is introduced as a plot device when Lex imports it to create a weapon. Batman steals it and forges a kryptonite spear and gas grenades to use in the final fight. The actual Batman and Superman showdown lasts under 10 minutes, but it's packed with heavy choreography, effects, and emotional buildup. The fight ends when Superman says Martha, his mother's name, which is also Bruce's mother's name. That moment snaps snaps Bruce out of his rage, causing him to abandon the fight and realize they're both just trying to protect others. This scene sparked massive debate for how it resolved the conflict. Lex then unveils Doomsday, a creature he created using Zod's body and Kryptonian technology. The battle with Doomsday takes place on a deserted island outside Metropolis. Wonder Woman enters the fight, marking her first cinematic appearance. The three team up to fight Doomsday, but the creature's power keeps escalating. Superman sacrifices himself by using the Kryptonite Spear to kill Doomsday, dying in the process. The score, composed by Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL, mixed industrial and orchestral styles. The film ends with Clark's funeral and Bruce and Diana deciding to find other metahumans. It set up the foundation for the Justice League, even though the reception was mixed. Critics called it overly dark and dense, but it left a huge impact on how DC films move forward. Justice League. Released in 2017, this version was directed by Joss Whedon, though it began under Zack Snyder. Snyder left during post-production due to a personal tragedy, and Whedon stepped in to complete the film. He rewrote large portions of the script and reshot significant scenes, changing the tone, structure, and character arcs. The result was a hybrid that clashed in style, pacing, and visual consistency. The budget ballooned to about $300 million, and it earned around $650 million globally, which was considered underwhelming for a film of this scale. The story picks up after Superman's death in Batman vs. Superman. Batman believes a new threat is coming and starts recruiting other metahumans. Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman joins him, along with Jason Momoa as Aquaman, Ezra Miller as The Flash, and Ray Fisher as Cyborg. Together, they form a team to fight Steppenwolf, a cosmic warlord trying to unite three ancient artifacts called Mother Boxes. Without Superman, the team struggles to stop him. Steppenwolf was redesigned and downgraded from his original concept. He was given a simpler look and a shallow motive, mainly wanting to conquer Earth for vague reasons. The three boxes are hidden in Themyscira, Atlantis, and with humans. The team recovers one and uses it to resurrect Superman using Kryptonian technology and the power of the box. When Superman returns, he's disoriented and attacks the team. His memories eventually come back after seeing Lois Lane. Once he's stable, he joins the final battle in a generic industrial area in Russia. Whedon added more jokes, one-liners, and brighter colors throughout, especially in scenes with The Flash and Superman. The humor felt forced for some and disrupted the tone built in earlier films. Cyborg's story was heavily cut. Originally central to the plot, his connection to the Mother Boxes was barely explained in this version. The runtime was reduced to 2 hours and entire subplots were removed. Scenes that had deeper emotional weight in Snyder's cut were replaced with lighter alternatives, sometimes using obvious digital face replacements. Henry Cavill's mustache had to be digitally erased because he was filming another movie during reshoots. That led to noticeable CGI issues, especially in the opening scene. Danny Elfman composed a new score that included nods to the original Batman and Superman themes, replacing Hans Zimmer's work. This version was intended to be the definitive team-up film, but ended up being seen as rushed, uneven, and compromised. Zack Snyder's Justice League. Released in 2021 on streaming, this was the original version of the story before Joss Whedon took over. After fan campaigns and studio reconsideration, Snyder was allowed to complete his cut with full creative control. The runtime jumped to 4 hours, split into chapters. It used no footage from Whedon's version. All the scenes were either original Snyder footage or new material shot during a brief additional production. The tone returned to the serious, mythic style of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. The film starts with Superman's death cry echoing across the world, waking the dormant Mother Boxes. Steppenwolf comes to Earth, aiming to retrieve them and prove himself to Darkseid. This version gave Steppenwolf a complete redesign with metallic reactive armor and a clearer motive. He's trying to repay a debt to Darkseid after failing him in the past. The Mother Boxes are explained as ancient pieces of sentient technology used by Darkseid in an earlier failed invasion. Cyborg's role becomes central. He's connected directly to the Mother Boxes, and his backstory is fully restored. His relationship with his father, Silas Stone, is expanded, showing conflict and eventual sacrifice. Flash's arc is also deepened, including a scene where he turns back time by running faster than light, reversing the destruction of Earth. That sequence was entirely absent from the theatrical cut. The team forms more gradually with motivations clearly built. Batman is driven by guilt and hope, while Wonder Woman brings knowledge of ancient history. Aquaman's hesitation to join is better developed, and his scenes connect more directly to his solo film. Martian Manhunter appears in 2 scenes, revealing himself as General Swanwick from earlier films, setting up future plotlines that were never continued. Superman's return plays out differently. His resurrection is tense, but he recovers faster. After donning a black suit, he joins the final battle in a more coordinated effort. Unlike Whedon's version, the climax ends with Steppenwolf beheaded and his body thrown through a portal to Darkseid, who vows to return. The epilogue includes nightmare scenes showing a dystopian future with Batman, Flash, Cyborg, Deathstroke, and Joker forming a resistance. Tom Holkenborg, also known as Junkie XL, composed the new score from scratch. It replaced all previous music and aligned more closely with with the film's heavy tone. The movie ended up being praised for its clarity, character depth, and restoration of the original vision. James Gunn's Superman. James Gunn's upcoming film, set for release on July 11th, introduces David Cornswet as a 25-year-old Clark Kent. This version portrays Clark balancing his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing, working as a journalist at the Daily Planet in Metropolis. Rachel Brosnahan plays Lois Lane, and Nicholas Hoult takes on the role of Lex Luthor, the CEO of Luthor Corp. The film is not an origin story, but focuses on Superman's journey to reconcile his dual identity. It features a runtime of 122 minutes, making it the shortest Superman film in nearly 4 decades. The cast includes Isabella Merced as Hawkgirl, Nathan Fillion as Green Lantern Guy Gardner, Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific, Anthony Kerrigan as Metamorpho, and Maria Gabriela de Faria as the Engineer. Filming began on February 29, 2024, in Svalbard, Norway, for scenes featuring the Fortress of Solitude. Production continued in Atlanta, Georgia, and Cleveland, Ohio, wrapping up in July 2024. The film was shot using IMAX-certified cameras with visual effects by Framestore, Industrial Light and Magic, Weta FX, and Rodeo FX. The musical score is composed by John Murphy and David Fleming, incorporating a new version of John Williams' iconic Superman March theme. James Gunn has emphasized that this Superman embodies truth, justice, and the American way, representing kindness in a world that often sees it as outdated. The film aims to explore Superman's role as a symbol of hope and his interactions with other heroes in a world where superheroes already exist. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.